Hey beloved sleepyhead, I know you've had a long day. Maybe it was busy, maybe a little heavy, maybe even just ordinary. But no matter what today looked like, I want to say you made it through, and I'm so glad you're here now. Before we step into the world of dreams, I want to ask you something simple but powerful. What was the one good deed you did today? Maybe you made someone smile. Maybe you helped a friend, fed a pet, or forgave someone who didn't even know. Tell me in the comments, because I'd love to know how this sleepy little community spreads goodness in the world. We're all lighting little candles in the dark, one small kindness at a time. Okay, let's begin. The stars are wide awake tonight, but down in Nowhere, the farmhouse is quiet. Eustace is snoring in his chair. Muriel is humming as she knits a new blanket, and Courage is watching the shadows dance across the walls. It had been a long, slow day. Nothing unusual, just the kind that slips away like sand between your fingers. And as the sky turned navy blue, something arrived at the door. Muriel stepped outside. "Oh dear," she said. "A package. But I didn't order anything, did I, Courage?" She picked it up and carried it inside. A box wrapped in faded string. No name, no return address. Just there, waiting. Inside the box was a rug, woven deep red with golden threads, swirling like ancient symbols, soft to the touch. "Too soft," Muriel said. "Well, isn't this just lovely?" She laid it in the living room, just beneath the coffee table, and Courage stared, because something didn't feel right. Not dangerous, just wrong. That night, Courage curled up at the foot of Muriel's bed. Eustace, of course, had long passed out in front of the TV. And Muriel, she slept peacefully, her hand resting gently on Courage's back. But Courage was listening. At first, he thought it was the pipes, then maybe the old boiler. But no, it was slower, more alive. He tiptoed out of the bedroom and into the hallway. The sound was coming from the living room, from underneath the rug. He approached carefully, ears twitching, sniffed the rug, listened closer. Okay, maybe it's just an echo, or soup. Maybe soup can beat like a heart. But the sound didn't stop. Thump, thump, thump. He reached a paw toward the corner of the rug, tried to lift it, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the rug had grown roots, anchored to the wood beneath it. Courage's fur prickled. He turned to leave, when suddenly, Eustace yelled, "Stupid dog!" Courage jumped 3 feet in the air, bolting back down the hall. And as he slipped into bed again, the sound faded, slowly, like it never happened at all. The night grew quieter. The heartbeat softened, or maybe Courage was just too tired to hear it anymore. But under the floor beneath the rug, something waited, something remembered. The morning came slow, like honey sliding down a spoon. Golden light touched the windows of the farmhouse, and the wind outside whispered as it always did. Courage opened his eyes, unsure if he had even slept. The night before lingered in his mind like fog that wouldn't lift. Muriel smiled from the kitchen, stirring something warm and sweet. "Good morning, my darling Courage," she said softly. "Did you sleep well?" Courage wagged his tail a little, but his ears drooped. He glanced toward the living room, toward the rug. Muriel followed his eyes. "You're still worried about that silly old thing, aren't you?" She laughed gently. "I think it's beautiful, and you know sometimes beautiful things just show up when we need them most." But Courage wasn't so sure. When Muriel stepped away, he tiptoed back into the living room. The rug sat perfectly flat. No breeze, no movement, no sound. He lay down beside it, nose just inches away, and waited. Seconds passed, then minutes, then there it was again. Thump, 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 thump. He pressed his ear to the wood. It wasn't just sound, it was feeling, like something alive, something deep. His eyes widened. He tried to lift the rug again, gently, slowly, but once more, it didn't move. Later that day, while Muriel napped in her chair and Eustace grumbled at the radio, Courage opened an old drawer near the fireplace. Inside were tools, dusty papers, and a flashlight. He waited until the house was quiet again, the sun hanging low, casting long sleepy shadows. Back to the rug. He turned on the flashlight and peered underneath its edge, hoping to see anything at all. The floor there was cracked. Slightly. Just enough for a sliver of air to whisper through. He leaned close, holding his breath. Thump, thump, a little louder now. And then a soft creak. Not from the house, from underneath, from somewhere below. Courage whimpered quietly, but didn't back away. He peered deeper, pressing his eye to the crack, and for just a moment, he saw it. A single eye, wide, pale, staring back. Courage gasped and stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp with a dull thud. Muriel stirred in the other room. Courage, everything all right, dear? He paused, looked at the rug again. No heartbeat, no eye, no sound. He mumbled nervously, tail tucked low. That night, Muriel read him a bedtime story. One about a robin who sang so sweetly, it could calm even the most frightened creature in the woods. She tucked the blanket up to his chin and kissed the top of his head. You're safe here, sweetheart, she whispered. Even when it feels scary, you're never alone. Courage's eyes fluttered closed, and he dreamed. But not of robins. In his dream, the house was dark. The walls leaned inward. The clock had no hands. And beneath the floor, the eye opened again. Calm now. Not angry. Just watching. The thump returned. Slower this time. Deeper. Like it was syncing with his heartbeat. And Courage didn't run. He listened. The morning sky was the color of warm milk, stretching over the plains of nowhere. Courage opened his eyes slowly, the dream still clinging to him like mist. The heartbeat, the eye, the silence beneath the floor. It hadn't gone away. In the kitchen, Muriel hummed softly as she watered her plants. Her song filled the air like sunlight through lace curtains. Eustace, of course, was still asleep, his snores echoing from the armchair in the next room. Courage padded across the hallway. He paused at the rug again. It hadn't moved. Not an inch. But something about it felt different this morning. It seemed almost warmer, like it was breathing. He sat beside it for a while, watching, listening. The house was quiet, but the heartbeat was still there. Fainter, slower, almost sad. He tilted his head and leaned forward, resting his chin against the floor. Thump, thump, like a lullaby with no melody. That evening, as twilight melted the sky into violet and blue, Muriel dusted the mantel. She paused, her fingers lingering on an old photo, one she hadn't seen before. Now how did this get here, she murmured softly. In the photo was a man with kind eyes. He stood in front of the farmhouse, long before it was theirs. His name was carved on the frame. Edwin Graves. She sat quietly with the picture, a far-off look in her eyes. Courage, she whispered. Does this place ever feel like it remembers things you don't? Courage looked up at her. He nodded. Muriel smiled faintly. I thought so. That night, as the stars stretched across the sky like threads, Courage dreamed again. But this time it wasn't fear he felt, it was memory. Not his memory, but the house's. In the dream he stood in the same living room, but everything was older, dimmer. The wallpaper was torn, the lights flickered. A woman stood by the window, waiting for someone who never came home. Then came the sound, the same thump, and a man's voice, soft and low. I only wanted the quiet, I only wanted peace. The voice echoed, then faded like smoke. Courage awoke before dawn. The house was still. The moon glowed through the window. He walked to the fireplace. Something tugged at him. Behind an old loose brick, he found it. A tiny journal, cracked and fragile. Inside, pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was neat, delicate. I've buried it beneath. The sound won't stop. The eye won't close. But I couldn't destroy it. I couldn't. I only wanted silence. The journal was signed, E.G. Courage held it close to his chest. The house creaked gently above him. The wind whispered against the glass, and somewhere beneath the rug, the heartbeat continued. Slower now, and maybe, just maybe, it was beginning to rest. The sky above Nowhere was a gentle gray, the kind that made the world feel soft and slow. Rain tapped lightly against the farmhouse windows, not enough to wake anyone, just enough to hum in the background like an old song. Muriel was in her rocking chair, sipping warm tea with her favorite blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Courage sat by the fireplace, the tiny journal tucked beside him like a secret he hadn't yet shared. He stared once more at the rug. It sat in perfect stillness, but Courage felt it watching. Or perhaps it was listening. He rose slowly and stepped toward it. This time he didn't hesitate. He pressed his ear to the floor. Thump, thump. It was fainter now. Not frightened, not angry, just tired. He leaned in further, peering into the crack beneath the rug. And there again was the eye. But something was different. It wasn't wide with panic like before. It blinked, slowly, softly, as if acknowledging him. Courage didn't scream this time. He sat there quietly, eye to eye with whatever was beneath. Muriel's voice drifted from the kitchen. Courage, love, I had the oddest dream last night. She walked in and joined him, kneeling beside the rug. I was standing right here and someone kept whispering a name in my ear. Edwin. Over and over. And then, they said thank you. She looked down at the floor. Do you hear it too? Courage nodded. Muriel placed her hand gently on the rug. For a moment, everything was still. No heartbeat, no wind, no sound at all. And then, thump. One more. Clearer. Stronger. That night Muriel slept peacefully. Eustace, as usual, grumbled in his dreams about taxes and soup. But Courage lay awake beside the rug, his paw resting gently against it. He didn't feel fear anymore. He felt something else. Connection. Like he wasn't alone in the room. Like someone had been waiting a long, long time to be heard. As he drifted into sleep, he dreamed again. This time he was beneath the floor. Wooden beams stretched above like ribs of an old whale. And in the center of the room was the heart, glowing faintly, pulsing slowly. Beside it stood the man from the photo, Edwin Graves. He didn't speak. He simply looked at Courage and placed a hand over his own chest. Then he smiled. The dream began to fade, warm and still. The last thing Courage heard was a whisper that felt like wind in his fur. You listened. The wind outside had grown quieter, like even the sky was resting. Inside the farmhouse, the light was golden and sleepy. Muriel stood at the window, holding a cup of tea in both hands, watching the clouds drift slowly across the morning. Courage sat beside the rug, not out of fear now, out of curiosity, out of care. The heartbeat was still there, but it had changed. Thump, pause, thump, a rhythm that felt less like a warning and more like a memory. He placed a paw gently on the rug. It felt warm. Not hot, not heavy, just. Muriel joined him and sat on the floor, cross-legged like a little girl. I don't think it's angry, she said softly. I think it's lonely. Courage looked up at her. She smiled and began humming. Not a song from the radio, something older, a lullaby passed down in whispers and time. The house responded. The floor gave a soft sigh beneath them. The heartbeat matched her tune, steady, gentle, almost grateful. Later that day, Courage explored the attic. He felt drawn to it. Behind dusty boxes and forgotten blankets, he found a chest. Inside, yellowed papers, a pressed flower, and a letter sealed in wax. The name written across it. To the one who hears. He carried it down to Muriel, his paws soft against the stairs. She opened it slowly and read aloud. If you find this, know that I am sorry. I buried the memory because I couldn't bear its weight. But memory is a living thing. It breathes. It calls. It wants to be known. And it will wait until someone listens. Until someone remembers me with kindness. Muriel wiped her eyes. She touched the rug once more. It's time, she whispered. That night, Courage sat beside her on the couch. The lights were low, the tea was warm. Eustace had fallen asleep in his chair, mumbling nonsense in his dreams. Courage leaned into Muriel's side and listened, not just to the heartbeat, but to the quiet all around it. The kind of quiet that comes when something long unsettled finally settles. The kind that fills a house not with fear, but peace. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since the rug arrived, he didn't hear the thump, just the sound of Muriel's breathing, the ticking of the clock, the hush of a house that no longer had anything to hide. The moon hung low and full, casting soft silver across the empty plains of nowhere. Inside the farmhouse, not a single light flickered. All was still. Courage sat quietly in the center of the living room, his eyes on the rug. He wasn't scared anymore. He wasn't confused. He was simply present. Muriel stood behind him, holding a candle in her hand. The flame barely moved. She knelt down and placed the candle at the edge of the rug. "I think it's ready," she said softly. Courage nodded. Together they gently lifted the rug. This time, it moved easily, like it had been waiting. Beneath it, the wooden floorboards had darkened with age. In the center, one plank was slightly loose. Courage reached out, paw trembling just a little, and lifted it. There, nestled inside the hollow, was a small heart-shaped box. Old, wooden, worn smooth at the edges, as if it had been held many times. Muriel opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph of a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Beside it, a folded letter, and a pressed bluebell flower, still faintly fragrant after all these years. She read the letter aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "To the one who finds me. If you are reading this, then I am no longer part of this world, but I have never truly left. I buried my sorrow and sealed it with silence. But silence can't heal what love can, and if you've come this far, then you've already done what I could not. You listened, and for that, I am free." Muriel closed the letter and placed the photo gently beside it. She smiled, tears welling but not falling. Courage leaned into her side. Together they returned the box to the floor, but this time with care, not fear. Courage pressed the plank back into place. Muriel lowered the rug over it. The candle's flame shimmered once, then settled into stillness. That night, Courage curled into his little bed beside Muriel's chair. Eustace, snoring as always, never stirred. The wind outside softened into a lullaby, and for the first time since it all began, there was no heartbeat, only silence, but not the heavy kind, not the kind born from fear or forgetting. This was a warm silence, the kind you feel when something has come home. Courage closed his eyes. The house no longer watched. It rested. The soul below, remembered at last, was finally asleep. "Let's begin the next tale, buddy." The wind was different that evening. It didn't howl or rattle, it whispered. Long and slow, like someone telling a story they've told 1,000 times. The sky over nowhere was brushed in shades of rust and gold. Leaves drifted across the porch in lazy spirals. And far off in the distance, something stirred. In the kitchen, Muriel was baking her pumpkin pie, her favorite for the first crisp day of fall. The scent filled the house with warmth and spice. Courage sniffed the air and sighed, already feeling sleepier than usual. Eustace was grumbling, as always, about the draft. "No good wind, always pushin' my hat off." Muriel chuckled. "Oh hush, Eustace. It's just autumn making her entrance." But outside, something else had entered too. Not autumn, not wind, something older. Courage stood by the window, ears twitching. Through the dusk, far beyond the fields, he saw it. A faint flickering light. A lantern, held high by someone or something, riding slowly through the dust. He blinked. The rider had no head. The lantern swung gently as the figure moved across the horizon, slow, deliberate, as if searching. Courage gasped quietly. He ran to Muriel and tugged her sleeve, trying to explain with whimpers and gestures. She smiled down at him. Oh, Courage, you're just spooked by the stories again. You've got pumpkins on the brain. But Courage wasn't imagining it. That night, as the farmhouse settled into silence and the stars began to blink overhead, he saw the light again, closer now. This time it stopped, right on the hill behind the house. The rider stood motionless. The lantern glowed like a quiet fire, and though the figure had no head, Courage could feel its eyes, searching, yearning. He pressed his nose to the glass. The rider didn't move, but the lantern slowly lifted, pointing toward the farmhouse. Toward them, and then, as if swallowed by mist, he vanished. Courage crept back to Muriel's room, curling at the foot of the bed. Her gentle breathing soothed his racing heart. He listened for the wind. It had gone still, too still, and beneath the stillness, a whisper, not a voice, not words, just the kind of sound a memory makes when it wants to be found. The morning came quietly, wrapped in fog. Thin gray mist curled over the porch, soft as cotton. The trees swayed gently, but the wind made no sound. It was the kind of day that felt halfway between waking and dreaming. Courage stepped outside, paws crunching over dry leaves. He looked toward the hill where the rider had stood. Nothing now, just grass and fog and stillness, but the feeling remained. Muriel was in the garden, gently trimming her herbs. She smiled as he approached. "Strange air today, isn't it, Courage?" she said softly. "The kind that feels like something is trying to be remembered." Courage nodded. He sat beside her, eyes fixed on the hill. She placed a hand on his head. "You know," he hadn't told her about the rider. Muriel stood slowly, brushing soil from her hands. "Kindness, Courage," she said gently. "That's what brings lost things home." That night the wind returned, not loud, not wild, just enough to carry whispers across the plains. Courage sat by the window again, waiting, and there it was, the lantern, glowing, closer. Not on the hill this time, on the path leading toward the house. The rider didn't move quickly. He rode as though every step was chosen with care, as though each inch of ground held a memory. Courage pressed a paw to the glass. No fear this time, just a heavy quiet inside his chest. He turned and tiptoed to Muriel's room. She was already awake, sitting up, holding the old photo album in her lap. "He's outside again, isn't he?" she asked softly. Courage nodded. Muriel looked out into the night, and for just a moment, her eyes filled with tears. "I think I knew him once," she whispered. "Long, long ago, before Nowhere had a name." The wind picked up, just a little, and somewhere in the distance, a faint hollow sound like hooves across a memory. The sky that evening turned the color of ash and rose. The lantern appeared again before the stars had even gathered. It stood still at the edge of the yard, its light warm but quiet, like a candle in prayer. Courage watched from the porch, ears gently twitching, heart beating steady and soft. He didn't bark, he didn't hide, he only watched. The rider did not move. No threat, no demand, only presence. Inside the house, Muriel was dusting the mantel when she paused. She stared at a small carved wooden box that hadn't been there yesterday. "Courage," she called gently. "Did you put this here, dear?" He shook his head. Muriel opened the box. Inside was a yellowed ribbon and a pressed wildflower, fragile and faded but still whole. She held it carefully in her hand. "I remember this," she whispered, and then she began to hum. A melody Courage didn't know, but felt like he'd always heard. Soft and slow, like a song sung for someone who'd gone away long ago. Outside the wind paused, and the lantern glowed a little brighter. That night Courage curled up beneath the kitchen table, where the warm smell of old pie and cinnamon lingered in the floorboards. The lantern remained outside. It did not come closer, but it did not leave. Muriel stepped out onto the porch. She held the ribbon and flower close to her heart. She looked into the night and said, "You can stay as long as you need." No answer came. No voice. Only the soft flicker of flame in the dark. Later, as the house settled into sleep, Courage dreamed again. In the dream he was riding through the plains on the back of a silent horse, in his paw a lantern. Beside him a rider with no face, no name, but a heart full of longing. The light ahead was not to scare, not to haunt, it was to guide, to find, to come home. The wind returned in the early hours, not with force but with feeling. It swept through the grass like fingertips brushing old pages. In the sky the stars shimmered faintly, as if listening. Courage stood in the hallway, half awake, drawn by something not quite sound and not quite thought. He followed it to the fireplace. There, glowing in the lantern light outside, was something tucked between two bricks. A letter. Old. Faded. Written in careful, delicate script. To the one who remembers, it began. Courage brought it to Muriel, who sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in her shawl, hands curled around a warm mug of milk. She read it aloud, her voice soft as breath. I was a messenger once, a quiet man with no name, but many roads. I carried words between hearts. One day I lost something I could never replace. Not a head, not a voice, but the kindness given to me, long ago by a woman who sang in the fields. Muriel paused, tears in her eyes. I remember him, she whispered. I don't know how, but I do. Courage leaned into her lap. She stroked his ears. I was just a girl, she said. I helped a traveler who'd lost his way, gave him water, sang him a lullaby, and then he was gone. I never knew what became of him. Outside the lantern began to move, not toward the house, but in a slow, wide circle around it, as if tracing the memory, marking the moment. That night Courage and Muriel sat quietly on the porch. She hummed that lullaby again. The same one from so many years ago. The melody drifted into the night like smoke from a candle, and in response the wind grew still again. The rider didn't approach, he didn't vanish, he waited, and remembered. The sun rose slow and low, barely brushing the tops of the fields with its sleepy light. Courage woke with a quiet stretch, his body heavy with dreams that still lingered in the corners of the room. The house was silent, not empty, just resting. Muriel stood by the window, looking out over the plains. She held the letter in one hand, the old ribbon tucked into the other. He's not angry, she whispered. He's just waiting for someone to see him. Courage joined her, peeking out. The lantern was there again, still glowing but softer now, like the flame had grown tired. Like it too had been waiting too long. Later that afternoon, Muriel brought out her old wooden rocking chair and set it near the front porch. She sat with a basket of yarn in her lap and Courage at her feet. As she rocked gently back and forth, she spoke softly into the breeze. I never knew what happened to you, but if you're still here, you must have been looking for something you thought you'd lost. The wind answered with a single swirl of leaves that landed gently beside her. In the center of the spiral, a small tin badge, worn, bent, stamped with the faded word, courier. Muriel picked it up with trembling hands. I remember now, she said. You gave me this, didn't you, for the song I sang, said it was all you had. She placed the badge beside the lantern, which now sat at the edge of the porch. Not left there, just there. As dusk settled in, the rider returned, still headless, still silent, but no longer shadowed in mystery. The horse stood calmly. The figure didn't raise the lantern, he simply waited. Muriel stepped forward. I see you, she said, and I remember what you were trying to carry. The light inside the lantern flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Courage sat beside her, heart slow and warm. They stood in silence, not afraid, not sad, just present, just remembering. Night fell like a blanket, thick and quiet. The lantern no longer flickered. It glowed steady and warm, as if content. As if it had done what it came to do. Courage sat beside it on the porch, his eyes reflecting the golden light. Muriel stood behind him, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, the old ribbon tied gently in her hair. The rider stood still at the end of the path. He didn't come forward. He didn't vanish. He waited, just one last time. Muriel stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but strong, steady like her kindness. "I don't know your name," she said softly, "but I remember your kindness. I remember the water you gave my family when the well was dry. I remember the song you asked me to sing. I remember you." The wind moved gently around her, like arms around shoulders. Leaves rose in a slow spiral. Courage watched as the ribbon in her hair glowed faintly in the lantern's light. The rider reached into the folds of his coat. He held something out, not with hands, but with presence. A second ribbon, faded, ghost-like. Muriel nodded. She tied it to the porch rail, beside the glowing lantern. A moment passed, stillness, and then the rider bowed. No sound, no wind, no words, just a soft bend forward. A goodbye, a thank you. He turned slowly, the lantern fading with each step. Courage stood beside Muriel as they watched him disappear into the night. Not swallowed by fog, but embraced by it. And when he was gone, the lantern light gently faded. Not snuffed out, just no longer needed. Muriel sighed and sat in her rocking chair, hands folded in her lap. "He's not lost anymore," she said. "He was never scary, just forgotten." Courage curled up at her feet. The porch creaked gently. The stars above blinked in their quiet rhythm, and far away, in a place no longer haunted, a memory rested. The plains of nowhere were still, not because nothing moved, but because something had finally come home. Courage closed his eyes. The wind carried a final whisper. "I remember you too. Hey buddy, let's move to the next tale of our cozy night." It was one of those nights when the sky feels thick with secrets, the kind of sky that holds its breath, the kind of clouds that lean heavy with thunder but never quite fall. The farmhouse sat quiet beneath it all. Inside, Muriel was stirring her famous root vegetable soup, filling the kitchen with the scent of thyme and roasted garlic. Eustace, as usual, had dragged something strange into the barn, a pile of wires, rusty metal poles and old clock parts he insisted were worth a fortune. Courage watched him from the porch, ears twitching with every clank and clang. Eustace grunted, "Gonna build something useful for once." Courage wasn't convinced. Later, as the first rumbles of thunder rolled across the sky, Eustace stumbled into the house, muddy, grumpy, and demanding soup. Muriel smiled and ladled it into his favorite chipped bowl. "I left your scarecrow propped up again," she said. "Wind nearly took him away." "Bah," muttered Eustace, "he ain't going anywhere." But outside the wind was listening, and the scarecrow stood just a little straighter than it had that morning. That night, lightning danced across the plains. Courage lay curled at the foot of the bed, but his ears wouldn't rest. Every crash of thunder made the floor tremble. And with each bolt, something strange stirred in the barn. The soup pot, still warm, had been left outside, Eustace's idea for natural seasoning. Beside it, the scarecrow leaned against a metal rod stuck in the earth. Wires soaked from the storm dangled across its limbs. Courage crept to the window and peeked outside. One flash of lightning, and for the briefest second, the scarecrow turned its head. Courage yelped and dove under the covers, but outside the wind only howled louder. The barn door creaked open, and somewhere in the shadows cloth rustled, stitched limbs shuffled forward, in silence, but not emptiness, a new kind of silence, one filled with breath that didn't belong. Morning drifted in with pale, quiet light. The storm had passed, but its whispers still clung to the walls like fog. The air felt different, charged, like the world had rearranged itself just slightly, while no one was looking. Courage yawned and stretched, padding through the hall toward the kitchen. Muriel was humming as she cooked breakfast, flipping pancakes with a dreamy smile. Eustace sat at the table with his usual grumble, sipping black coffee and mumbling about dreams filled with ticking clocks. But Courage couldn't stop glancing out the window. Toward the barn, toward the open door that no one had closed. Later that day, while Eustace napped in his chair and Muriel worked in the garden, Courage slipped outside. The sun was soft behind heavy clouds, and the wind nudged the grass like a whisper trying to say more. The barn door creaked gently as he pushed it open. Dust floated in the air like old memories. The scarecrow pole stood empty. Tools lay scattered on the ground, wires, boots, a half-eaten biscuit. Courage tiptoed inside. In the far corner he saw something new, a figure, sitting, still, slumped against the hay, its head drooped forward, stitched from burlap and buttons. Courage crept closer. The figure wasn't threatening. It looked lost. Its chest rose and fell in a slow, uncertain rhythm. Its fingers twitched, as if trying to remember how to move, and its eyes, if you could call them eyes, were soft, unsure, flicking toward Courage like a question. They stared at each other in silence. Not a heavy silence, not a scared one, just wondering. Courage tilted his head. The creature mirrored him. He reached out a paw. The stitched hand reached back. Outside, the wind carried a single leaf through the air, spinning in lazy circles before settling near the barn door. Inside, a moment passed. The creature lowered its hand, curled up in the hay, and closed its eyes. Courage sat beside it, heart beating slow, thoughts quiet. It didn't have a name. It didn't have a voice, but it had breath now, and that was something. The scarecrow slept through the day, breathing gently, shifting only when the wind tapped at the barn walls. Courage stayed nearby, curled up in the hay. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was curious. The stitched creature wasn't like Eustace's usual inventions. It wasn't loud, or sharp, or mean. It was gentle, almost shy. In the late afternoon, Muriel came to the barn looking for carrots. She paused in the doorway when she saw them. Courage and the creature, sitting quietly in the dim golden light. "Oh," she said softly, hand on her chest. Her voice wasn't afraid either. She stepped inside slowly, crouching beside Courage. "Where did you come from, sweetheart?" she whispered to the creature. The creature looked up. Button eyes blinked slowly. It didn't speak, but it reached out awkwardly and gently touched the hem of Muriel's dress. Then it lowered its hand again and looked down, as if unsure if it had done something wrong. Muriel smiled. Her voice was warm and kind. "You're all right. You're safe now." She brushed hay off its shoulder, careful not to pull a thread. Then she turned to Courage. "He didn't ask to be here," she said quietly, "but he is, and that means something." They brought him food that night. Not that he ate much, but he held the bowl with great care. They gave him a name too, something simple and soft. Patch. He liked it. He nodded when they said it, and that night, he sat outside the barn, gazing at the stars with Courage beside him. Patch raised a hand to the sky, like he was trying to remember something. Not from a past life, not from memory, but from the pieces of things, wind, soup, soil, light, stitched into him without words. Courage looked up at the same stars. They weren't alone out there, but down here, in nowhere, they had each other. Morning came with golden fog, the kind that wraps the house in cotton silence. Patch was already awake, sitting cross-legged in the barn, slowly moving his fingers as if trying to learn what hands were for. Courage brought him a spoon. Patch turned it over in his palm, fascinated by its curve, its shine. Then he held it up to Courage like a gift. They both smiled in their own quiet ways, but inside the house Eustace was watching, grumbling, muttering. "That's my scarecrow," he said. "I built it. If it's walking around now, it belongs to me." Muriel shook her head gently. "Eustace, it's not a thing anymore. It's someone." But he wouldn't listen. He stormed out to the barn, wrench in one hand, frustration in the other. Courage followed quickly, heart thudding, not from fear but from knowing what Eustace might do when he felt small. He found Patch sitting peacefully, stacking empty soup cans like a tower. When Eustace barged in, Patch stood up slowly, unsure but unafraid. Eustace raised the wrench. "You don't belong here," he snapped. "You're just parts, just rags and wires." Patch took a step back. Courage leapt in front of him, arms outstretched. Muriel arrived at the doorway. Her voice didn't yell, it didn't shake, it just said one word: "Stop." Eustace froze. Muriel stepped forward and took the wrench from his hand. "Look at him," she said. Patch was holding the spoon, not to protect himself, not to fight back, but as an offering, a peace. Eustace blinked. He looked at the creature he once called a scarecrow, and for a second he saw it. The breath, the stillness, the stitched-together heart behind button eyes. He muttered something under his breath, turned and walked away. Courage sat beside Patch, who gently lowered the spoon and bowed his head. Not from shame, but from understanding. That night the wind was kind. The barn doors didn't creak, and the stars blinked softly as if watching with care. Patch slept with the spoon tucked beneath one hand, and Courage slept beside him, close and calm. The next morning began with mist rolling low across the ground and dew resting gently on every leaf. The world felt slower, like it had paused to listen. Patch sat outside the barn, his legs folded beneath him, hands open in his lap. Courage sat beside him, watching the breeze ripple through the grass. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Sometimes, the best kind of conversation is the kind that floats between heartbeats. Muriel came out with warm muffins wrapped in a towel. She handed one to Courage, and then, with a kind smile, offered one to Patch. He took it carefully, held it for a moment, and then placed it beside him like a treasure. "I don't think he eats," Muriel whispered, "but he understands what giving means." She sat beside them and rested her hand gently on Patch's shoulder. "You're safe now," she said. Patch looked at her with soft, steady eyes. Not human eyes, but not empty either. Courage leaned into Muriel's side and closed his eyes. Later that day, Muriel returned to the kitchen, and Courage stayed outside. Patch was still sitting in the same spot, but he had started doing something new. He was digging, not deep, just small scoops of earth with his stitched hands, as if planting something only he could see. He buried the spoon there, gently, tenderly, then patted the earth smooth. Courage watched in silence. He understood. That spoon wasn't just metal. It was the moment he felt kindness. The first time someone offered him something not because he was useful, but because he existed. Now it was part of the soil, part of nowhere. That evening Patch wandered slowly through the fields behind the house. He didn't seem lost, only curious. He touched flowers with reverence. He paused at the sound of bees, and when the wind brushed against him, he stopped and turned his face to it, like it was an old friend. He was stitched together from scraps, but inside was something whole. Night came gently to nowhere. No storm, no wind, just the hush of stars settling into place, and the low hum of a world finally resting. Patch stood at the edge of the field. The moonlight turned his stitched skin silver, and the buttons of his eyes reflected the sky. He didn't move much. He just stood there, as if listening. Behind him Courage walked slowly through the grass, paws barely making a sound. He stopped beside Patch and looked up. Patch reached out, not to grab, not to hold, but to point. In the distance the hills rolled like folded blankets, and somewhere far beyond them, the wind moved with purpose. Not loud, not cold, just steady, like breath. Muriel joined them, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. She stood beside Patch and whispered softly, "You don't have to stay here forever, but you'll always belong here." Patch turned toward her. His body was still stitched, still worn, but something about him had changed. Something inside had grown. Quietly, patiently, kindly. Muriel reached out and placed her hand gently over his heart. "You were made of silence," she said, "but now you carry something else." Patch lifted one hand, and for the first time pointed to himself, not as a question, but a name. Not spoken, but known. Muriel smiled. "Patch," she whispered. "You are Patch," and the wind agreed. It circled them gently, rustling the leaves, brushing past their cheeks, as if to carry the name across the fields and into the sky. That night, Patch lay in the barn for the last time. Courage curled up beside him, his small pink body breathing in time with the soft night air. The stars blinked slowly above. The earth was still, and somewhere beyond nowhere, the wind carried a story. Not of a monster, not of a mistake, but of something stitched with care and filled, quietly, with love. Let's start the next tale, beloved. The attic door hadn't opened in years, not because it was locked, just forgotten. It was one of those doors that creaked quietly to itself in the night. One of those places that held memories not because they were precious, but because no one remembered to let them go. One gray afternoon, Muriel was organizing her spice cabinet when a gust of wind rattled the attic door. It swung open just a little, enough to be noticed, enough to be inviting. "Oh my," Muriel said, brushing flour from her hands. "I forgot that was even there." She climbed the creaky ladder, humming softly as dust tickled her nose. Courage followed, nervously of course, but loyal as always. The attic was filled with sleepy things, trunks of old coats, boxes of yellowed papers, forgotten clocks that had stopped ticking long ago. And in the far corner, leaning against the wall, was a painting, covered in a faded sheet. Muriel tilted her head. "Did we always have that?" She lifted the cloth. The portrait underneath showed a young woman, bright eyes, soft skin, hair like silver spun from moonlight. She looked like Muriel, only younger, much younger. Courage's fur prickled, but Muriel just smiled. "Well, how flattering," she laughed gently. "I wish I still looked like that." She carried the painting downstairs and placed it gently on the mantel. It seemed harmless, almost sweet. That night Muriel went to bed early. She felt lighter, rested. Her hands didn't ache as much, and when she looked in the mirror, the lines around her eyes seemed softer. Courage noticed too. But what he noticed more was the way the painting's eyes seemed to shift. Just slightly, just enough. And in the middle of the night, when Courage walked past the living room, he could have sworn the portrait blinked. Just once, like it was waking up. Morning light spilled through the windows in ribbons of gold. The house smelled of warm bread and soft butter. Courage rubbed his eyes and padded into the kitchen. Muriel was already there, humming. She moved gracefully, as if her joints no longer remembered how to ache. Her hair shone, her cheeks glowed. She looked younger. "Good morning, my sweet Courage," she chimed, placing toast on a plate. "You look tired. Did you sleep poorly?" Courage blinked slowly and nodded. He hadn't slept well. He had dreamed of the portrait, of its eyes following him through the house, of a smile on its face that wasn't in the original painting. After breakfast, Courage wandered to the living room. The painting hung calmly above the mantel, bathed in soft light. The woman in the portrait still looked like Muriel, but her expression had changed. Her lips were parted in a faint, knowing smile. A smile that hadn't been there before. A smile that wasn't Muriel's. Courage tilted his head. The eyes in the painting seemed to look slightly to the left now. He could feel them, watching. Muriel came in, tying a silk ribbon in her hair. "Oh, Courage," she laughed. "I feel 20 years younger, maybe 30. That painting must be magic." Courage barked once, gently. But Muriel only smiled and walked away. Later, when Courage passed by the mirror in the hallway, he stopped. His fur looked ruffled, his eyes tired. More tired than usual. That night Courage curled up at the foot of Muriel's bed. She sang a lullaby softly to herself as she drifted off. One Courage hadn't heard in years. He watched her face in the moonlight. Peaceful, unchanged. But the longer he stared, the more he noticed something odd. A shadow on the wall across the room. A silhouette of the painting, even though it wasn't nearby. And in the shadow, the painted eyes were open wide, and smiling. The days passed gently and nowhere. The skies were soft, the wind calm, and the air warm enough to leave the windows cracked open. But inside the farmhouse, something unseen was shifting. Muriel's voice was sweeter, her movements smoother. She no longer reached for her cane. She no longer napped in the afternoons. She baked more pies. She sang more songs. She smiled more often. And the portrait smiled too. Courage had stopped looking at it directly. Every time he did, he noticed something new. something small, a wrinkle gone, a gleam in the eyes, a curl in the corner of the mouth, not warm, but watchful. One night, Courage crept into the living room while the others were asleep. He stood in front of the painting and stared. The house was silent, but deep beneath that silence was a whisper. Not with words, not in sound, a kind of pull, a hush that reached into Courage's chest and made him feel smaller. He took a step back, and the smile in the painting grew. He turned to run, but his paw brushed the frame. A shock ran through him, like touching cold metal in a dream. He gasped softly and looked down. His reflection in the glass of the frame looked tired, older. The painting was still beautiful, still glowing, still taking. The next morning, Muriel danced while making breakfast. She spun with a wooden spoon in her hand, laughing. "Oh, Courage, I had the most wonderful dream," she said. "I was young again. I was in a garden. I was singing." Courage tried to bark, just once, softly, but no sound came out. Muriel didn't notice. She kissed the top of his head and served him a warm bowl of oatmeal. "You're such a good boy," she said. "I'm so lucky to have you." Courage sat in silence. He looked toward the portrait on the wall. The woman in the frame was smiling wider now, her head tilted just a little, as if she was listening, as if she had heard something Courage hadn't even said. The painting hung calmly on the wall, too calmly. Even the air around it felt still, like breath holding itself in. Courage sat in the hallway, watching it from just far enough away that the smile didn't reach him. Muriel was humming in the kitchen, baking blueberry scones and smiling like she hadn't in years. But Courage was tired. His eyes sagged, his steps dragged. Even his dreams had started to fade, drifting into gray, soundless fog. That afternoon, a breeze pushed through the house, soft and sudden. The windows fluttered, the curtains waved, and something fell. The painting, just an inch. It tilted on its hook, and in the quiet that followed, Courage heard it. A faint, dry sound. The smallest crack. He crept closer. There, at the corner of the canvas, hidden beneath the bottom edge of the frame, a line, thin, hairline, splintered through the paint, like a whispered scar. Courage reached out with a trembling paw. His nail brushed the crack, and the room grew colder. Not freezing, not cruel, but old. The air smelled of dust and forgotten breath. The woman in the portrait blinked. Just once. Courage stumbled back. His heart beat too fast, then slowed too quickly. The painting was perfect again, flawless, unbothered, but the crack remained. That night Muriel sat by the fire with a needle and thread, sewing a patch on Courage's blanket. "You've been so quiet lately," she said gently. "Are you feeling all right, love?" Courage looked up at her. She looked radiant in the firelight. Too radiant. He opened his mouth, but again no bark came, just silence. Muriel stroked his head. "Maybe we both needed a little magic," she whispered. And behind her, across the room, the portrait smiled wider. The crack in the paint shimmered for a moment, like something beneath it was breathing. Morning came with silver light and birdsong, the kind of day that makes the world feel gentle, like the sky is exhaling. Muriel stood at the kitchen sink, humming an old lullaby. Her face glowed with softness. There were no lines on her hands, no weight in her steps. She looked younger than Courage had ever seen her. But Courage could barely move. His paws felt heavy, his head low. Every blink took effort. He looked into the hallway mirror as he passed, just briefly, and paused. His reflection didn't look quite right. His eyes looked older. His ears drooped lower. His fur was thinning, slightly, just enough to notice. He turned to the painting. It still hung there, still perfect, still lovely. But the crack had grown. It now curved like a smile in the corner of the canvas. And when Courage stepped closer, the frame itself gave a low creak like something stretching. He peered into the glass, but what stared back wasn't quite Muriel anymore. It was her face, yes, but her eyes looked sharp, cunning, almost pleased. Courage backed away. The room felt darker, though no lights had gone out. The colors in the walls seemed to fade. Only the painting remained vibrant. That evening, Muriel sat with Courage on her lap. "You're slowing down, my sweet one," she whispered. "Maybe it's just your time to rest more. I feel so full of life. But you, oh, you're always so tired." She kissed his forehead and laid him gently in his bed. Then she walked to the portrait and touched the frame with delicate fingers. "I don't know how you do it," she said to it softly, "but I thank you." The smile in the painting seemed to shift again, and somewhere deep within the wood and paint, a faint ripple passed through the surface. Not visible, not loud, just enough to say, "I am still here." That night, Courage dreamed of mirrors, long hallways of reflections, and in every one Muriel's face looked back. Beautiful, youthful, but never quite her. He kept walking, and at the end of the hall was the painting, and behind the paint, behind the smile, he saw himself. Small, worn, drifting. The wind whispered low through the farmhouse that night. It didn't shake the windows or rattle the door. It sighed, like something tired, something old, ready to be heard. Courage lay curled at the foot of the bed, heart slow, breath shallow. The room was warm, and Muriel's gentle humming filled the air like steam from tea. She looked young as ever, radiant, timeless, but Courage was fading. The painting still hung above the mantel, bright and golden even in the moonlight. Its crack had almost vanished, sealed smooth like skin that had never been torn. But Courage had seen too much, and so when the house grew still, he rose, slowly, carefully, and crept once more to the living room. The painting was waiting. He stood in front of it, trembling. It smiled, and then Courage did something he hadn't done in days. He barked. Not loud, not angry, just once, softly. The sound echoed through the room like a bell. The painting flickered, the glass trembled, and behind it, just for a moment, he saw the truth. The woman inside was not Muriel, not anymore. She was only her shadow. A reflection grown hungry. But Muriel, the real Muriel, was still there. In the way she touched his ears, in the lullabies she sang, in the love that couldn't be painted or borrowed or bought. The frame cracked, the glass splintered, and then silence. The painting dimmed, the eyes closed, and the smile faded. In the morning, Muriel awoke and looked in the mirror. She saw a wrinkle at her cheek, a softness at her eyes. She touched her face and smiled. "Well, I suppose magic doesn't last forever," she said, chuckling. "But love does." She bent down and lifted Courage gently into her lap. "You're back," she whispered, "and I'm still me." The painting was gone, just an empty wall and a few flakes of gold on the floor. No one spoke of it again. And no one needed to, because what remained in the house wasn't youth or beauty, but something quieter, something stronger, the kind of love that doesn't fade with time. Let's travel through the next story. It started with just a single rat, scurrying across the porch in the early light, tail flicking, nose twitching. Muriel watched from the kitchen window, sipping her tea. "Oh dear," she said softly. "I hope that's not the beginning of something." But of course it was. By the next day there were 3. By the end of the week there were dozens. Quiet, quick, darting under chairs and between walls, never making much noise, but always there. Courage tried everything. Traps, cheese, even kind-hearted negotiations. Nothing worked. The rats weren't aggressive. They didn't bite, but they didn't leave either. They simply made themselves at home. Eustace, naturally, was no help. "Stupid rats. They'll move out before I do," he muttered from his chair. Muriel kept sweeping the corners of the house, placing herbs by the door, leaving little treats in the field in hopes they'd wander off. "They're just looking for a place to belong," she said gently. "We all are." Still, the house didn't feel like itself anymore. At night, Courage would hear tiny footsteps across the attic floor, squeaks in the walls, and once, just once, he saw a line of rats standing perfectly still at the edge of the yard, all facing the same direction, as if they were waiting. Then, one morning, the wind shifted. The sky looked pale and stretched, and across the prairie came a figure. Tall, thin, cloaked in dusty red, and in his hands a flute. He played no tune, not yet, but the soundless presence of him felt musical. He walked toward the house, smiling in a way that made the air feel thick, and when he reached the fence, he bowed. Then he spoke, not loudly, not with force, just enough. "I hear you have a problem," he said, "and I have a tune." Courage narrowed his eyes. Muriel stepped out onto the porch. "Can you really make them go?" she asked. The piper smiled. "For a small price," he said. "Just one thing, one soul, one sweetness." Then he looked at Muriel, and he smiled wider. Courage growled, low, quiet, unsure. The piper simply tipped his hat, and the rats, all across the field, stood up to listen. The prairie was still, the sky pale like paper, and the stranger in the red cloak stood just beyond the porch. He lifted his flute and played. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cheerful. It was a song that didn't quite have a melody, just long winding notes that seemed to curl through the air like smoke. The rats moved instantly. From the cracks, the corners, the fields, and the barn, they emerged. Quiet, calm, walking not like animals but like sleepers pulled by a dream. Muriel gasped softly. Eustace looked up from his chair muttering, "What in tarnation?" But Courage already knew. This tune wasn't a gift, it was a net. The rats followed the piper into the fields, vanishing over the horizon like mist. The song ended, and the house was quiet. Muriel looked stunned, relieved. "You did it," she whispered. The piper turned. "Of course I did," he said, bowing low. She smiled faintly. "What do you want in return?" He looked at her with soft, glowing eyes. "Only what is promised," he said. "The kindness that lingers in this place, the soul that made it warm, the light in the kitchen, the heart of the home." Muriel blinked, confused. Courage stepped forward, growling softly now. The piper tilted his head. "The woman," he said. "I will take her with me. She will be the song." Muriel laughed, thinking it a joke, but Courage didn't, and the piper didn't smile. He just turned slowly and walked back into the prairie, disappearing into the golden dusk. That night, Muriel slept peacefully, unaware. Eustace snored as usual, but Courage sat by the window all night, eyes wide, watching the field. Because far in the distance, barely lit by starlight, a small red figure stood waiting. The flute glimmered in his hand, and even though there was no sound, Courage could still feel the tune. The sun rose slowly, reluctant to wake. The fields of Nowhere looked quiet, but the quiet felt watched. Muriel moved through the house like always, watering the plants, fluffing the pillows, humming as she stirred her tea. But Courage noticed something different. She was humming the piper's tune. Not exactly, just the shape of it. The notes like echoes in her chest. She didn't notice. "I feel light today," she said cheerfully, as if something heavy left the house. Courage's tail curled tight. He paced through the rooms. Nothing was broken. Nothing was missing, except something in Muriel's eyes. Something a little too far away. He crept back into the field where the piper had vanished. The grass was untouched. No footprints, no scent. But on the old wooden fence post, there was a single rat. Small, still, and carved into the wood beside it, a symbol, a circle with a line through it, like a closed eye. That night, Courage waited until Muriel was asleep. He went to the attic, the place where quiet things hide. In a dusty box, tucked between blankets and memories, he found something strange. An old photograph of Muriel, young, smiling, standing beside a man with a flute. The same flute. The man's cloak was lighter then, his face more human, but the eyes were the same. On the back of the photo, in fading ink, "To the one who was kind when I was not." The piper hadn't just found them by accident. He had returned. For a debt. For a promise. For Muriel. The next morning she didn't remember the tune, but she was quieter, lighter, like something was slipping from her, softly. Courage sat by the porch all day, watching the horizon, waiting. The piper hadn't come yet, but Courage knew he would. That night the wind carried melody, faint, distant, not loud enough to hear clearly, but clear enough to feel. Muriel was asleep in her rocking chair. Eustace snored on the couch. Courage stood at the front door, ears twitching, eyes wide. The moonlight painted long shadows across the fields, and then he came. The piper stepped out from the tall grass, red cloak glowing like a coal in the dark. He held his flute, not to his lips but close, as if the song could begin at any moment. He walked slowly to the porch, quiet as breath. Courage stepped outside to meet him. The piper smiled. "Has she said goodbye?" he asked gently. "As promised?" Courage growled, not loud, not fierce, but steady. The piper tilted his head. "She gave me a kindness once, long ago, when no one else did, and kindness leaves a thread." He looked toward the house. "She warmed something in me, and now I only ask for the warmth back." Courage shook his head. "She will not suffer," the piper said. "She will not age, or ache, or weep. She will become the song." Courage stepped forward. "No?" the piper whispered. "Then what will you offer instead?" The wind grew still. Courage looked back at the window. Muriel was still sleeping, head tilted, mouth slightly open like a child. He turned back and nodded. The piper blinked. "You would go in her place?" Courage stood tall, a little trembling, a little unsure, but unwavering. The piper lowered his flute. "Brave," he said softly. "Strange and brave." He bowed low. "Very well," he said. "I shall return tomorrow for the one who chooses." And with that, he vanished into the tall grass. No sound, no echo, just the wind. Courage sat on the porch the rest of the night, watching the horizon. He wasn't afraid. He had already decided. Morning arrived slowly. The sky was pale and wide, the fields still sleeping under a blanket of dew. Muriel made breakfast as always, biscuits, warm and flaky, honey on the side. She moved through the kitchen like a gentle breeze, humming again without knowing it. The tune, the piper's tune. Courage sat at her feet, watching her carefully. She looked bright, peaceful, unaware. He didn't tell her. He didn't need to. Some things you do because love doesn't ask questions. Later, he walked through the house one more time. He visited his little bed under the window. He looked at the garden where Muriel planted thyme and rosemary. He sniffed the place on the rug where the sun always landed. And when the wind picked up, carrying the softest notes of a flute, he went to the porch to wait. Muriel called from inside. "Courage, darling, where are you going?" But Courage only looked out toward the prairie. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. Then she saw him, the piper, waiting in the field. Muriel stepped forward, confused. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice wavering. The piper didn't answer. Courage did. He stepped between them. The piper gave a slow, sad smile. "You choose then," he said. "You offer your own song." Muriel gasped. "Courage, no, you can't." But he already had, and the piper began to raise the flute. When Muriel stepped forward and touched Courage's back, she knelt beside him, tears in her eyes, but smiling. "No," she said softly. "No, he's not the one who owes you. I am." The piper's hands froze. "I gave you kindness once." "Yes," she whispered. "But kindness is not a debt, it's a gift, and gifts don't have to be returned." The piper lowered the flute. The wind paused. Muriel stood up, chin high, heart full. "You don't get to take what was freely given." And the piper stepped back, not in anger, in understanding. The piper stood still. His red cloak fluttered gently in the wind. His flute hung by his side. For a long moment, no one spoke. The house behind them held its breath. Muriel reached down and picked up Courage, holding him close to her chest. "You came here for something warm," she said softly. "You came for something you once had, and lost." The piper's eyes flickered. For the first time he looked tired. Muriel stepped forward, one hand still on Courage's back. "I gave you kindness once, because you needed it, and that part of you it's still there. Even now, the piper blinked slowly. His flute rose, not to play, but to offer. He held it out. Muriel didn't take it. Instead, she reached forward and placed her hand over his. For just a moment, the prairie was silent, and then the flute crumbled gently to dust. No sound, no resistance, just a quiet surrender. The piper's red cloak faded slowly to gray, then to white, and then vanished with the breeze. There was no farewell, no warning, just peace. Courage let out the softest sigh and rested his head on Muriel's shoulder. She looked out at the fields. The grass swayed gently again. No rats, no songs, just wind. Inside the house, Eustace was still snoring on the couch, unaware of what had come and gone. Muriel walked back to the porch and sat down with Courage in her lap. "You were ready to give everything for me," she whispered. Courage blinked slowly. "You're brave, my darling, but you never had to be alone." The sun dipped lower in the sky. The prairie glowed gold, and somewhere, a soft, true note rose and drifted away. Not from a flute, but from the heart of a story that had finally ended. Yes, friend, let's go through the next tale. The sky was soft and gray over nowhere. The kind of sky that feels like it's thinking, quiet, heavy, waiting. Muriel was in the kitchen, humming as she folded laundry. Eustace grumbled about soup, and Courage lay curled near the door, eyes fluttering between sleep and worry, as they so often did. Then a knock, not loud, not sharp, just a knock. Courage opened the door. There was no one there, just a small brown box wrapped in old twine. Muriel picked it up and read the label aloud. "To the one who dares to dream." She raised an eyebrow. Well, how curious. Inside the box, wrapped in velvet, was a charm. A curved claw, black as ink, shiny, smooth. Set in a little gold ring with 3 tiny stones. A note came with it. 3 wishes, no more. Each a thread in the tapestry of fate. Hold the claw and speak aloud. Muriel chuckled. Sounds like one of those old traveling stories. A fortune teller's toy. Eustace grabbed it. Bah, gimmicks. Let me try. He held the claw and smirked. I wish for a sandwich. Courage's eyes widened, and in the kitchen, the toaster sparked to life. The fridge swung open. A plate slid across the counter, and there it was, a perfect sandwich. Piled high just the way Eustace liked it. Muriel blinked. Oh my. Courage shivered. The claw sat still in Eustace's hand, one of the 3 stones now dull. Eustace laughed. Finally, something in this house that works. Muriel looked uneasy. Courage, more so. He stared at the charm as Eustace devoured the sandwich, and for just a moment, just a blink, he saw something move in the reflection on the claw's surface. Not a shadow, not light. Something else. Something watching. The claw sat on the mantel that night, glowing faintly in the dark. Not bright enough to light the room, just enough to be seen. Just enough to remind Courage it was still there. Muriel tucked him in and kissed his head. I suppose there's no harm in a little magic, she said. But sometimes, the wrong dreams can still come true. Courage whimpered gently. He didn't sleep well. In his dream, the claw was walking. Not crawling, walking, upright like a hand. It wandered the house, touching things. Chairs, windows, pictures. Every touch left a smudge. A stain that pulsed like a heartbeat. When he awoke, the room was quiet. Too quiet. Eustace sat at the table, sipping coffee, scowling. The wish wore off. I'm hungry again. He grabbed the claw. I want something bigger this time, he muttered. Muriel walked in just as he spoke. Eustace, wait, maybe we shouldn't. But he already had a wish for money. The claw grew warm in his hand. The second stone went dull. Outside, the wind picked up. Moments later, the phone rang. Muriel answered it. A pause, a gasp, then silence. Courage watched her shoulders sag. She hung up the phone and turned, her voice trembling. "There's been a mistake at the bank," she whispered. "They say they deposited a large sum into our account. But it was meant for someone else, someone who passed away." Her hands shook. She looked at Eustace. "They said it was from a Mr. Cartwright. You remember?" Eustace blinked. "That old stray we fed last winter." Muriel nodded slowly. "He passed, left us everything. All we ever gave him was a blanket and a name." Courage's eyes widened. The wind outside howled through the trees. The claw sat still. Only one stone remained. Eustace didn't smile. Even he could feel it now. The weight, the twist, the price. Muriel wrapped the charm in a cloth and placed it in a drawer. "No more," she whispered. But the claw glowed gently from beneath the fabric. Like it wasn't done, like it was waiting. The house was quieter the next day. Not peaceful, just still. Like something beneath the floorboards was listening. Muriel made tea but forgot the sugar. She sat by the window longer than usual, staring into the clouds like she was searching for something. Eustace didn't speak. He watched the drawer. The one where the claw now rested. Courage stayed close to Muriel's side. He could feel it in the air, the weight of the final stone. The last wish, the unspoken pull. That evening, while Muriel was knitting, and Courage dozed beside her feet, Eustace stood. He moved to the drawer. Slow, quiet. He unwrapped the charm, held it in his hand. Courage woke instantly, eyes wide. Eustace's voice was low. "I wish," he began, then paused. He looked at Muriel, at the lines in her face, the way her hands trembled, just slightly. The gray in her hair. "I wish," he said again, softer, "that she didn't have to grow old." Muriel gasped. "No, Eustace, don't." But the wish was made. The final stone dimmed, and the charm cracked. A fine line split down the center of the claw. A sound like a far-off whisper filled the room. Courage covered his ears. Muriel stood frozen. Then as the light faded from the windows, she took a step forward, and paused. Her eyes widened. She reached for her chest. Her breath shallow. She wasn't aging. She was slowing. Not living without age, but slipping without time. "I feel light," she whispered. "Like I'm not quite here." Courage howled. The claw fell from Eustace's hand. It hit the floor with a dull sound and rolled toward Courage. He picked it up in his trembling paws. It was colder now, but still, listening. He looked at Muriel. She was fading in place. Still smiling, still warm, but like a photo caught in sunlight. Courage held the broken charm to his chest and closed his eyes. He didn't know how to fix it, but he knew he had to try. The night came fast, too fast. As if time had forgotten how to stretch. Muriel sat in her rocking chair, wrapped in her favorite blanket. Her hands were still, her smile gentle, but her eyes far away. "I feel like a story being erased," she whispered. Courage sat at her feet, clutching the broken charm. It no longer glowed, but something in it remained. A hum, a whisper, a thread still holding on. He carried it to the attic, to the old trunk with forgotten things. He opened books, found a journal with faded drawings of charms, symbols, warnings. One page stopped him, a sketch, a claw, and underneath it a phrase, "To unmake a wish, give it back to time." Courage didn't understand, but he felt it, the meaning behind the words. He looked at the charm, Then at the clock, the hour hand was stuck. The second hand moved backward, slowly. Courage climbed to the roof. The wind howled. The sky shimmered with strange light. He held the claw to the sky and closed his eyes. His thoughts were not words but feelings. Love, regret, hope, he whispered. I don't want her to fade. Take the wish back. Take it from me instead. The wind stopped. Completely. The house below went still. Then a single breath of air. The claw crumbled in his paw, piece by piece, turning to dust. And as the final flake drifted into the breeze, the stars above blinked once, and then held. Back inside, Muriel stirred. She blinked, breath, looked at her hands, whole, present. A little older, but here. She stood slowly, holding the edge of the chair. Courage, he rushed in, threw himself into her arms. Oh my darling, she whispered. I'm all right. I'm really all right. Outside, the dust of the charm drifted down over the field, like snow without weight, and vanished. The morning came slow and golden. Birdsong wandered through the open windows. The house felt quiet again, not in fear but in peace. Muriel stood at the kitchen counter, stirring a pot of oatmeal. She looked different. Not younger, not older, just real. Here, every breath grounded in now. Courage sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes a little heavy, but steady. She turned to him. Did something happen, Courage? She asked. He blinked, then nodded just once. She smiled and knelt beside him. I thought I had drifted away, she whispered, like a dream fading after morning. But then something pulled me back, something soft and brave. Courage leaned into her and she wrapped her arms around him. I don't know what you did, but thank you, she said. You reminded me that the best kind of time is the kind we share. Later she walked to the porch and sat in her rocking chair. Eustace, still half asleep, muttered something about sandwiches and napkins. The drawer where the claw had been was empty now. The box gone, the velvet lining folded neatly. Muriel found the note again, the original one. 3 wishes, no more. But beneath the words, a new line had appeared, barely visible in fading gold. True love cannot be wished into being, but it can be chosen over and over. Muriel looked up at the sky. I choose him, she whispered. Courage, resting by the screen door, opened one eye and wagged his tail. That night, the stars blinked slowly. The wind hummed gently through the trees. No curses, no wishes. Just the sound of a house remembering how to breathe. Night returned to nowhere in its usual quiet way. No wind, no lightning. Just moonlight on the porch, and the slow creak of Muriel's rocking chair. Courage lay beside her, curled like a comma at the end of a peaceful sentence. He listened to her hum softly. No spells, no strange tunes. Just an old lullaby she'd known since she was a girl. She reached down and brushed a leaf from his back. You know, she said gently, we think we need more time, but really we just need to love better with the time we have. Courage sighed, a soft puff of air, into the night. In the field the stars shimmered like faraway lanterns. The house didn't whisper anymore. There were no claws, no deals, no debts. Just wooden floors that creaked honestly. Just windows that blinked kindly. Just hearts that beat slowly and stayed. Eustace snored in the next room, completely unaware of the curse that had come and gone like a passing shadow. Courage turned his head and looked at the empty corner of the mantel. The place where the charm had once sat was just a patch of dust now. And yet, he didn't feel lost. He felt peace. That night, as sleep finally found them all, Courage dreamed not of monsters or magic, but of soup, of a quiet kitchen, of Muriel laughing, of belonging, unpromised and unconditional. No more wishes, just love, given freely, and that after all was the truest kind of forever. You have made it through this tale, let's begin, great human being. It was midnight. Not the kind that arrives with drama, but the kind that slides in quiet, like a shadow settling across a dream. The farmhouse creaked gently in the stillness. Muriel was asleep in her chair, her knitting slipping softly to the floor. Eustace snored in his rocker, boots kicked off, hat tilted over his face. Courage lay curled near the fireplace, half awake, half sinking into sleep. Then knock, knock, not loud, not angry, just there. Courage's ears twitched. He crept to the front door and opened it slowly. No wind, no sound, just a single feather, black as ink, resting on the porch. And sitting atop the fence post, a raven. It blinked. Courage blinked back. Then in a voice dry as dust and deep as dusk it spoke. Is this the house of sorrow? Courage stepped back, trembling. The raven hopped once, then twice. Is this the place where memory sleeps? It asked. Courage didn't know how to answer. The bird tilted its head. Its eyes shimmered like old mirrors. Eustace stirred inside. What's all that racket? Stupid bird. He stormed out, waved a broom at the raven. Shoo! Get lost. But the bird didn't move. It stared at Eustace, and then it said, slowly, You locked the door before the voice was done. You sealed the box before the song was sung. You left behind what wasn't yours. Now time returns, through midnight's doors. Courage's heart thudded. Eustace scoffed and slammed the door behind him. But the raven remained. It turned back to Courage, and softly said, Midnight is open now, will you follow? Then it spread its wings, not flapping, floating, and drifted toward the edge of the field, where the fog had begun to glow. Courage looked back at Muriel, sleeping peacefully. Then he stepped into the night. The fog in the field was quiet, not cold, not thick, just there, like breath on glass. Courage followed the raven through it, each paw step making no sound. The bird didn't fly far, it drifted just above the ground, wings wide and slow, and then it stopped. At the center of the field stood something Courage had never seen before. A window, set into the earth, framed in stone, with no house around it. Just a window, looking down into somewhere else. The raven landed on its sill, and peered into the glass. This is where they keep what was left behind, it said. Courage looked into the window, and saw a room. Familiar, almost. It looked like their living room, but the colors were dimmed, like an old photograph. And in the middle of that room, Eustace, younger, alone, holding a broken photograph frame in one hand and a newspaper in the other. Courage looked up at the raven. What is this? He whispered. The raven answered with a single word. Regret. The fog swirled. Courage blinked, and suddenly he was no longer outside. He was inside the window, in the room, with the younger Eustace. But Eustace didn't see him, didn't hear him. The room was silent, except for the ticking of a clock that had no hands. The younger Eustace spoke aloud, to no one. I didn't mean to throw it away. He clutched the photo frame tighter. I didn't know it was the last one. Courage stepped forward, but the floor rippled like water beneath his feet. The raven's voice echoed from somewhere high above. This is not your memory, but you carry it now. Courage looked at the picture in Eustace's hand. The face was torn away, missing, but he knew it was someone Eustace had loved, someone lost, someone left unspoken. The world inside the window began to shake. The walls blurred. The ceiling melted upward into darkness. Courage turned, and saw the raven perched on a floating staircase. Time is soft here. Step lightly. Courage climbed the staircase. Each step floated in darkness. There were no walls, no sky, just soft echoes of ticking that never quite began. Almost sounds, almost time. The raven flew ahead, silent now, but its wings left trails of feathers in the air, like crumbs leading him forward. At the top of the steps was a door, old, wooden, paint peeling like sleep from a forgotten dream. Courage pushed it open. Inside was another room, dim, dusty, lined with clocks of every shape and size, but none of them moved. Not a tick, not a talk, just silence. At the center of the room stood Eustace, not young, not old, just suspended. He stared at a single clock on the wall. It looked like the one in their living room, but this one had no hands. Courage stepped forward. Eustace didn't see him, didn't blink. The raven landed on Courage's shoulder, lighter than air. Every hour he didn't speak. Every minute he turned away. Every second he chose pride instead of pain. This is where they wait. Courage looked around. The clocks had names etched into them. One read, "Sorry." Another, "I missed you." Another, "Why didn't I say it then?" Courage's heart sank. He looked up at the raven. "Why show me this?" he whispered. The raven blinked once slowly, because someone must remember what was forgotten, even if it wasn't theirs to forget. Suddenly, a soft chime echoed through the room, not from any clock, but from within. The clock on the wall began to glow, not move, just glow, and in the faint light Eustace breathed. Just once. He turned slightly as if hearing something. The raven lifted into the air again. "He's waking," it said. "Go, before the window closes." Courage turned, and saw the spiral staircase curling downward into the fog once more. He ran. The clocks watched him go, not ticking, just watching. Courage descended the spiral stairs. The fog had thickened, soft and still like sleep itself. But each step forward felt warmer, not like fire, like remembering. The path ended in a long hallway. The walls were old wood, the wallpaper peeled at the corners. Everything was dust. Courage walked slowly. At the end of the hall was a door. Above it, a carved name, Lenora. The air grew still. The raven landed beside him. "She lived once," it said softly. "She was a kindness lost, and he never said goodbye." Courage opened the door. Inside the room was small. A rocking chair, a window with no outside, and a single table with a book on it. The book was open to a page, but the words were faded, unreadable. On the windowsill sat a picture frame. The photo inside had cracked across the face, but now slowly, it was healing. Courage stared. The face in the photo looked like Muriel, but younger, and not Muriel. A sister maybe, a mother, someone Eustace had known, loved, and left behind. On the floor, written in the dust beneath the window, was a name, scratched in old careful letters. Lenora. Courage traced the name with his paw. Behind him, the raven spoke again. "He pretends he doesn't remember, but he dreams of her still." Courage looked down at the dust again. The name shimmered, and then the window opened. Wind rushed in, warm and slow. It blew the dust away. The photo stood clear now, whole, and from somewhere far, far away, Courage heard Eustace whisper in his sleep, "Lenora." The raven nodded once. "You've done it. You've turned the silence into a sound." The wind from the open window settled into a hush, not silence, but something gentler, the kind of quiet that listens. Courage stepped out of the room, the name Lenora still glowing softly in his thoughts. The hallway was gone now. In its place, a field of stars, floating, endless, each one pulsing like a memory trying to breathe. The raven flew ahead, its feathers trailing silver behind it. "This is where voices come when they've been left behind," it whispered. They drifted downward, slowly, until their paws and claws touched the soft shimmer of starlight below. In front of them, a doorway made of sky. Courage stepped through. Inside was Eustace, asleep in a chair. Not the real Eustace. Not quite. This one was softer, younger, smaller. He was humming a tune under his breath. Something sad, something safe. Courage sat beside him. The Eustace in the chair opened one eye. "I didn't mean to forget her," he said. "I just didn't know how to keep her." The raven circled once, then landed quietly. "You didn't need to keep her," it said. "You only needed to speak her name." Eustace looked down at his hands. They were shaking. "I couldn't," he whispered. "But he could," the raven said, looking at Courage. Eustace looked at Courage. Really looked. "You remembered for me." Courage nodded. "Just once." And then the stars began to drift upward. The chair faded. The sky folded into itself. The raven lifted its wings. "One more step," it said. And Courage understood. The stars folded inward, and the sky became a room again. A familiar room. The farmhouse. Muriel was sleeping on the couch, a blanket over her lap. Eustace sat in his chair by the fire, eyes half closed, his hat tipped back, his hands still. But something was different. The air felt warmer. Not hot, just filled with something Courage hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Courage stepped quietly toward Eustace. He looked older now. Not in years, in truth. Eustace didn't grumble, didn't frown. He just sat there, holding something in his lap. A photograph. It was whole now. Lenora smiled gently from the frame. Eustace looked at her, not with regret, with remembering. "I dreamed of her," he said softly. Courage blinked. Eustace didn't look away. "She used to read poems out loud. That's why I hated birds, you know. Always reminded me of the one she liked." He shook his head slowly. Quoth the raven. "She'd say, and I'd say, bah, but I never really forgot." He looked down at Courage. "Guess you helped me remember." The fire crackled. A feather floated down from nowhere, landing on the photo frame. Courage turned. The raven stood in the window, perched on the sill. Its voice was softer now. "The name has been spoken. The silence is done." Courage stepped forward. The raven opened its wings, not to leave, just to vanish. And before it faded, it spoke one last word. Nevermore. But not like a curse, like a promise. Nevermore would the name be hidden. Nevermore would the door stay closed. Nevermore would sorrow be silenced. Courage curled up by the fire. Eustace nodded off, the photo still in his hands. And Muriel stirred, murmuring something sweet in her sleep. Outside the sky darkened, but the house stayed warm. Good night, Courage. Good night, Lenora. Good night, listener. What was forgotten is remembered, and what was heavy has been laid gently down. Sleep well. You are safe. You are.
It started with a bottle, dusty, green glass, sealed with wax and tied with twine. Courage found it tucked behind a bale of hay in the barn, wrapped in cloth, half forgotten, humming softly to itself. He sniffed it once, twice, then backed away. The label read, "For strength, for self, for shadow." Courage didn't like it, but of course, Eustace found it next. "Heh? Some kind of moonshine?" he grumbled, holding it up to the light. Muriel raised a brow. "Maybe don't drink strange things you find in barns, dear." But Eustace had already uncorked it. It smelled like mint and lightning. He downed a sip, then another. and for a moment, nothing. Then, Eustace blinked, sat up straighter, smiled. "Muriel," he said softly, "you look lovely this morning." She froze, spoon midair. Courage gasped. "Would you like me to wash the dishes?" Eustace asked. The room was silent. He took the sponge, hummed as he scrubbed, then whistled a tune. Courage had only ever heard from Muriel. Something was very off. Muriel looked at Courage. He looked back at her. Eustace was still smiling, and for once the smile wasn't cruel. Courage tilted his head. The bottle on the counter glowed faintly in the sun. Eustace dried the dishes and sat down with a book. A book. "Maybe I'll take a nap in the garden later," he said softly. "Smell the flowers. Stretch the legs." Muriel blinked. Courage's tail twitched uneasily, because Eustace was being kind, gentle, grateful, and that was the most suspicious thing of all. The morning stretched long and golden. No wind, no chores, no yelling. Eustace made tea for Muriel. He used honey instead of sugar, just how she liked it. He even gave Courage a treat without a grumble or a scowl. Muriel blinked again and again, not quite trusting her eyes. "This is new," she whispered. Courage sat by the window, watching the sky. The clouds drifted lazily, no storms, no omens, and Eustace was still smiling. He watered the garden, he painted the mailbox. He whistled. "Maybe that tonic was just what I needed," he said, stretching his back. Courage peeked into the kitchen and saw the bottle again, now glowing slightly. 3 marks on the glass. One had faded. Courage shivered. That night, after dinner, Eustace tucked Muriel's blanket around her shoulders. "Sweet dreams, my dear," he said warmly. She kissed his cheek. Courage nearly fainted. The farmhouse sighed into sleep. But Courage stayed awake. He crept back into the kitchen. The bottle hummed softly, the second mark dimming. Courage sniffed it. The scent had changed. No longer mint and lightning. Now rose petals, and something else, like burnt sugar. From the hallway, Eustace laughed softly in his sleep. It was a kind laugh, but it echoed strangely, too soft, too deep, like it belonged to someone else. Courage tiptoed to the bedroom and peeked in. Eustace was asleep, but his face twitched, smiled, and for just a second, only a flicker. His eyes opened. They were darker than usual, not cruel, just empty, and then they closed again. Courage crept back to his blanket, heart beating gently. The storm hadn't come, but the air smelled like it might. Morning light slid through the curtains, pale and slow. The house smelled like toast and strawberry jam. Eustace was already in the kitchen, singing, not yelling, not muttering, singing. Courage blinked at the sound. Muriel sat at the table, hands wrapped around a warm mug. "He's been up since dawn," she whispered. Polished the doorknobs, swept the porch, whistled all the while. Courage peeked into the kitchen. Eustace had tied a dish towel around his waist like an apron. "Courage, my boy," he called. "Care for a bit of sausage?" He placed a plate on the floor, garnished with parsley. Courage crept forward, sniffed, then looked up. Eustace was smiling. Too much. Too wide. Too long. The corners of his mouth didn't relax. Muriel reached out and touched his arm. "Eustace, maybe sit down and rest a bit, dear." He turned slowly. "Oh no. So much to do. So much I've never done. Why, I might even knit." He laughed again, that soft off-key laugh. It was kind, but hollow. Courage stared at the glowing bottle on the counter. The 3rd mark had begun to fade. That night, the house was silent. Muriel had gone to bed early. Eustace sat by the fire, reading aloud, and he wandered the hills, not knowing he was already a ghost. Courage sat across from him, eyes wide. The fire cracked, and then Eustace stopped reading, lowered the book, and smiled again. But now the smile twitched, like it didn't belong to him, like it was being worn. His hands clenched slightly. He looked at Courage, still smiling, and whispered, "Too much kindness leaves no room for the truth." Then he stood and walked slowly into the hallway. His shadow on the wall looked longer. Wrong. Courage followed, paw steps silent. Down the hall the bathroom door creaked open, and there on the sink sat the empty bottle. It had stopped glowing. Eustace stared into the mirror, and his reflection didn't smile back. The bathroom was cold, too cold for a summer night. Eustace stood before the mirror, his breath fogging the glass. His eyes, once warm and soft, now held something else, something darker, something waiting. Courage crept to the doorway, ears low, watching. The reflection stared back, not just at Eustace, but through him. A flicker, a twitch, the glass rippled. Eustace's hand reached up, slow, hesitant, touched the mirror. For a moment, the surface shimmered like water disturbed by a pebble. And then, another face. Not Eustace, not kind, not human. The shadow smiled. Its grin was wide, too wide, stretching across a face with eyes like embers. Eustace gasped, stumbled back. Who are you?" he whispered. The shadow didn't answer. It only smiled, and slowly, silently, it stepped forward, from the mirror into the room. Courage growled softly, backing toward Muriel's bedroom. But the shadow didn't chase. It watched, waiting. Eustace, his eyes followed it, fear and fascination mixed. "Is this me?" he asked. The shadow tilted its head, then vanished into the dark. The room grew warm again. The mirror was just a mirror. But Courage knew better. Outside the bottle glowed faintly, and somewhere inside the house, a storm waited. The night stretched long and quiet. The house held its breath. Eustace sat in the living room, still as a statue. The shadow inside him whispered words he didn't want to hear, but he listened anyway. Muriel slept peacefully, unaware. Courage kept watch, eyes wide and steady. The bottle on the kitchen counter flickered once, twice, then glowed brighter. Eustace stood slowly, moving toward the barn. His footsteps echoed softly. But something was different. The air outside was heavy, thick with tension. The wind held its breath. In the barn, moonlight cast long shadows across the hay. Eustace reached for the old bottle. His hand trembled, not from fear, from something else. He uncorked it. The liquid shimmered like quicksilver. He drank. And then, the room seemed to twist. Colors bled. The shadows stretched. Courage's ears flattened. Eustace, his eyes snapped open. But they weren't his eyes anymore. They glowed. Not with kindness, not with warmth, but with something cold, something dark. The bottle shattered. The storm came. But inside the farmhouse, Muriel slept on, oblivious. Courage barked once, soft and urgent, and prepared for what was next. The storm howled softly outside, but inside the farmhouse the air was still. Eustace stood in the center of the room, no longer himself. His eyes glowed faintly, and a strange calm had settled over him. Not peaceful, not kind, but controlled. Courage stepped forward cautiously, heart steady, paws light. Eustace's voice was quiet but deep. "Who am I now?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a whispered wind. Courage looked at him, not the man he knew, but something else beneath. The shadow within fought to rise, but Eustace held it back. With every breath, every step, he reclaimed a little more of himself. Muriel woke softly, sensing the change. She moved to Courage and whispered, "He's still in there, my dear." Eustace nodded. a faint smile breaking through the darkness. Together they faced the storm inside, not with fear, but with love, with patience, with hope. The glowing bottle lay shattered on the floor, its power broken by the strength of their bond. The storm outside faded, the wind settling to a gentle breeze. Courage curled beside Muriel, eyes closing. Eustace sat quietly, no longer the farmer or the fiend, but simply himself. The farmhouse sighed, and sleep returned.
The night was still. The moon hung low and silver, painting the plains of nowhere in gentle light. Muriel was humming as she washed the dishes, her voice soft and sweet, floating through the farmhouse. Courage listened from the doorway, ears perked. But the song wasn't quite Muriel's own. It had a melody older than the stars, a tune that wound through the trees and whispered along the grass. Outside, the windmill stood silent, its sails still against the night sky. But for a moment, Courage thought he heard music coming from within. Curious, he padded outside. The grass was cool beneath his paws. The air smelled of old wood and forgotten stories. He walked toward the windmill, each step slow and quiet. The door was cracked open. A shadow moved inside. Courage's heart beat steady but soft. He crept closer. Inside, the air was thick with dust and secrets. The music grew louder, not harsh, not scary, but bittersweet. And there in the corner of the room stood a figure, masked, tall, wrapped in shadows. The phantom. He held a violin, and his bow danced over the strings. The music seemed to reach out to Muriel, and somewhere deep inside Courage, something stirred. The music drifted through the windmill's empty rooms like a slow river. Courage's paws barely made a sound on the creaking wooden floor. The masked figure didn't see him, or maybe he didn't want to be seen. The violin's notes were both sad and beautiful, wrapping the room in a quiet magic. Courage stepped closer, ears twitching. He could feel the melody pulling him forward. Suddenly, the music stopped. The bow lifted slowly from the strings. The phantom turned. His mask hid much, but not the kindness in his eyes. "Why do you come here, little one?" The voice was soft, almost shy. Courage whimpered gently. The phantom smiled faintly and lowered the violin. "I am not here to scare," he said. "I only wish to be heard." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying Muriel's voice singing. Not her usual song, but one that matched the violin's melody perfectly. The phantom's eyes brightened. "It is her," he whispered. "The voice that completes the music." Courage looked toward the farmhouse, hearing Muriel's singing grow clearer. The phantom stepped aside. "Will you help me bring her here?" he asked. Courage nodded. Together they listened to the song carried by the wind. And the night held its breath. The night air was cool and calm. Stars twinkled softly above the windmill, like scattered notes on a sheet of music. Muriel's voice floated over the fields, clear, warm, and sweet. It carried a melody that felt both new and ancient, wrapping around the trees and grass. Inside the windmill, the phantom's violin sang beneath her song, the two weaving together in perfect harmony. Courage stood at the base of the windmill, eyes wide, heart steady. The music filled the air, stretching out to every corner of nowhere. Even Eustace paused his grumbling to listen. Muriel's song grew stronger, more confident. Her feet moved as if dancing to the invisible rhythm. The phantom smiled behind his mask, bow moving in time with the stars. But beneath the beauty, Courage sensed a loneliness, a yearning that hummed beneath every note. The music was a call, a plea, a story waiting to be told. And Courage knew the night was only just beginning. The windmill creaked gently as the night deepened.
Shadows stretched long and quiet across the worn wooden beams. Courage moved softly between the shadows, ears twitching with every distant note. Muriel's singing faded into a whisper, carried on the wind like a secret. The phantom lowered his violin and looked at Courage. "There's more to this song," he said quietly. "A story of loss and love, of a heart waiting in silence." Courage tilted his head. The phantom stepped toward the window, eyes distant. "I was once a man," he murmured. "A man who loved music and kindness. But the world did not understand me." He touched the mask gently. "This mask hides not only my face, but my sorrow." Outside, Muriel's voice softened. The windmill seemed to hold its breath. Courage felt a flutter in his chest, a thread of sadness, woven into the melody. The phantom spoke again. "Will you help me find the missing note? The note that will set us both free?" Courage nodded. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, warm and still. The moon hung high and silver, spilling soft light through the windmill's open windows. Courage and the phantom sat quietly among the wooden beams. The violin rested gently in the phantom's lap. "The missing note," the phantom whispered, "is not just in the music. It's in the heart, the moment where courage meets kindness." Courage listened. He thought of Muriel's smile, her laughter, the way her voice could brighten the darkest night. "Maybe," the phantom said, "the note has been there all along." Courage looked up at the stars. He imagined the note as a soft glow, waiting to be found. The windmill seemed to hum softly in agreement. Then from outside, Muriel's voice rose once more, clearer than ever, singing the final line of the song. The phantom's eyes shone behind the mask. The violin's bow lifted, the strings sang. A single pure note filled the room. It was a sound of hope, of healing, of home. The note floated through the night, touching every corner of Nowhere. And Courage felt the music wrap around his heart, soft and steady. The dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds. The windmill's sails turned slowly in the morning breeze, creaking like a whispered sigh. Muriel stood outside, humming the song she had sung through the night. Her eyes were bright, filled with warmth and wonder. Courage lay beside her, eyes half closed, feeling the last notes of the music settle softly into the earth. The phantom stood at the windmill's door, mask lifted just slightly, revealing a gentle smile. He looked at Muriel, then at Courage, and nodded, a silent thank you. The music had found its way home. The loneliness that once wrapped the windmill like a shadow had lifted. The song was no longer trapped in silence. It was free. Muriel's voice and the phantom's violin blended into one soft melody. A song of hope, of kindness, and of belonging. Courage closed his eyes, the melody cradling him like a warm blanket. The wind whispered through the trees. The plains stretched wide and peaceful. And far away, the stars twinkled one last time before fading into daylight. "Let's begin the last story, buddy." The garden was quiet. Not the usual buzz of bees or chirp of birds. Just a gentle stillness that felt like a secret. Muriel was tending her flowers, humming softly as she moved between the blooms. The soil was warm beneath her feet. Courage watched from the porch, ears twitching at every rustle. Suddenly, the earth gave a small rumble. Muriel stopped. Her foot hovered above the ground. The soil beneath her shifted. A hole appeared, not wide, not deep, but just enough. Before she could step back, Muriel's foot slipped. She tumbled down slowly, softly, into the hole. Courage gasped. He raced to the edge. The hole glowed faintly, a swirl of colors, soft and strange. "Muriel," Courage called. But she was gone. He peered in. At the bottom was a door, small, painted bright blue. The door creaked open. Beyond it was a world like nothing Courage had ever seen. Trees with leaves like clocks, rivers that flowed backward, and shadows that danced without bodies. Courage took a deep breath. He stepped into the hole and the door closed softly behind him. The world beyond the door was unlike any garden Courage had known. Colors shifted like watercolor on paper, blending and swirling in slow, gentle waves. The trees whispered softly, not with words but with feelings. Leaves ticked like tiny clocks, falling upward instead of down. A river curled backward, carrying bubbles that popped into stars. Courage wandered carefully, senses alert but calm. He spotted a path of glowing stones, each pulse a heartbeat in the quiet. The path led to a small clearing where a curious figure waited. A cat, but not like any cat Courage had seen. It was striped in moonlight and shadow. Its eyes sparkled with mischief and wisdom. "Welcome, brave one," the cat purred. "Not many find the way to Nowhereland and live to tell the tale." Courage's tail twitched. "I'm looking for Muriel," he said softly. The cat's smile grew wider. "She's here, somewhere, lost between moments and memories. But she's not alone." The cat's eyes flicked to the swirling sky. "The garden holds many secrets, and only the kindest heart can unravel them." Courage nodded. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The path curled like a ribbon through the strange garden. Courage followed the glowing stones, their pulses steady and calm, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Ahead a giant clock tower stood, its face shimmering with stars instead of numbers. The hands moved slowly, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, like a dream trying to find its way. At the base of the tower sat a small door, just big enough for Courage to squeeze through. Inside was quiet, not empty, but full of ticking and talking, of memories held tight. A voice echoed softly. "Time is not what you think," it said. Courage turned. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tiny, kind-faced man with spectacles and a pocket watch that glowed like moonlight. "I am the keeper of the clock," he said gently, "and this is the place where moments wait, waiting to be remembered." Courage's eyes grew wide. "Muriel is here," he said. The keeper nodded. "But she's caught between seconds, lost in the spaces where time forgets to move." He handed Courage a small silver key. "This will open the door to her dreams, but beware, the path is not easy. You must be brave and patient." Courage took the key, his heart steady. He stepped toward the door and turned the lock. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a room bathed in silver light. Stars floated gently in the air, like fireflies caught in a quiet dance. Inside, the air smelled of old books and fresh rain. Muriel sat in a rocking chair, knitting softly. Her eyes were closed, but her face held a peaceful smile. Courage stepped forward, his paws light on the soft floor. He didn't want to wake her too suddenly. "Muriel," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open slowly. She looked around, surprised, then smiled warmly. "Courage, my dear," she said softly. "Where have you been?" Courage wagged his tail gently. Muriel stood, stretching like waking from a long sleep. "This place," she said, looking around, "is like a dream, a garden made of memories." Courage nodded. Muriel took his paw. "I think I was lost in time," she said. "But now I'm found." The stars above shimmered brighter, and somewhere far away the clock ticked once steady and the garden around them shimmered like a morning mist, soft and warm. Muriel held Courage's paw as they walked along a winding path paved with glowing stones. The trees whispered quietly, their leaves brushing together in a slow, soothing rhythm. The air smelled sweet, like honey and fresh earth. Muriel looked around with wonder. "This place is magic," she said softly. "But it's time to go home." Courage wagged his tail. He felt the pull of the waking world, gentle but certain. Ahead the path curved upward toward a gate made of silver vines. It sparkled in the soft light. Muriel paused at the gate. She looked back at Courage with a smile. "Thank you, my brave one," she said, "for finding me when I was lost." Courage licked her hand. He felt the warmth of her kindness fill his heart. Together they stepped through the gate. The world shimmered and shifted. The garden faded into mist. And suddenly they were back in the farmhouse garden. The hole closed softly behind them. Muriel looked up at the sky, blinking. "It's morning," she whispered. Courage yawned and stretched. The sun rose warm and slow. The sky was soft with the first light of dawn. The birds began their quiet songs. The garden was still fresh with dew and dreams. Muriel stood beside Courage, her hands resting gently on his fur. She smiled, eyes bright and calm. "We made it back," she whispered. Courage wagged his tail slowly, feeling the solid earth beneath his paws. The farmhouse awaited, warm and familiar. Muriel took a deep breath, the scent of flowers and home filling her lungs. She looked down at Courage. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being my guide." Courage nudged her hand. The world stretched wide and peaceful. No more holes to fall through. No more dreams to chase. Just the gentle light of a new day. Muriel stepped inside, and Courage followed, closing the door softly behind them. The hole in the garden was gone. Only the memory remained. And somewhere, in the quiet heart of nowhere, the clock ticked on, slow and steady. Thank you for joining me on this long journey through the whispered tales of nowhere. Together we wandered through shadows and dreams, through kindness and courage, through mysteries both strange and sweet. Now, as the night deepens and the stars twinkle just for you, it's time to rest, to let your mind float like a feather on the breeze, to sink gently into the softest sleep. Take a deep breath, in and out. Feel the weight of your day slip away, like leaves drifting on a quiet stream. You've done your best. You've shown kindness. You've been brave. And here, in this place between dreams and waking, you are safe. You are home. Imagine now the gentle plains of nowhere stretching out beneath a velvet sky, soft grasses swaying, bathed in moonlight. The farmhouse windows glow faintly, warm and welcoming. Inside, Muriel's lullaby hums softly, a soothing melody that wraps around you like a blanket. Feel the cool night air on your skin, the steady rhythm of the earth beneath you, the quiet song of the windmill turning slowly in the distance. There's no need to hurry, no place you must be, just this moment, just this peace. If your mind wanders, let it float like the paper boats on the pond in Muriel's garden, carrying gentle wishes and soft dreams. Remember Courage, the small pink dog with a heart full of love and courage, his paws quietly padding through the night, watching over all that mattered. And as you drift, know this, the stories may pause here, but the warmth they bring stays with you, a quiet light that will guide you through any darkness. Now close your eyes, let the steady rhythm of your breath be your guide, in and out. You are safe, you are loved, you are enough. Sleep well, dear dreamer. Until we meet again, sleep now, rest deeply, drift softly. Good night, my dear friend.